Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rob Robinson with Philosophy from the Frontline, episode number 42. Today's guest is Travis Johnson. This guy is a podcaster extraordinaire. So if you have not found him on the internet, then you're missing out because he's got a lot of great high quality content, and he's always connecting with new and improved ways to do your podcast better. And we'll probably dive into a little bit more of that later in the discussion about some of his new projects that he's working on. But really what I want to talk about is your transition process. And so we try and focus in on that. But without further ado, could you give us a quick background about yourself and what got you here on the show?
Quick background. I don't know if I have a quick anything in my arsenal, Rob. How many hours do we have here?
We can go as long as you need to.
Long as I need to? Great. Let me pull up my couch, ready for my therapy session. I leaned out of the frame and it refocused on my microphone, so now I'm all fuzzy, but I'm okay with it if you are.
Yeah, it's cool. We're doing audio only, so you don't have to be so glamorous, yeah.
Oh, I gotta be all pretty and comb my beard and stuff. It's gonna be great. The short details on me: did 22 years in the Navy, 11 enlisted, 11 commissioned, retired, turned down 04 so I could retire and do podcasting stuff. Started a show when I was deployed into Bahrain called the Nonprofit Architect Podcast, speaking about all that stuff, nonprofits, helping them do better. Really started with no following, no business doing podcasting. Went from nothing to number 4 in the U.S. within 3 months of starting. And quickly the conversation turned from, hey, what can you do for nonprofits to what can you do for podcasters? How is it that you're doing so well? What is it that you've got going on that I'm obviously missing out on? And it turned into our first, Ultimate Complete Podcast Guy was turned into our Ultimate Complete Podcast course that's just being added to the University of San Diego. It's in Forbes. It's in Belhaven University. And I think, as far as I know, no one's told me otherwise. I'm the only professional podcaster that's got their own college course, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty legit. So you talked about your transition out before reaching 04. When did you transition out of the military and why? Did you just get bored, or did you find something else to do, or was it kind of a conglomeration of things?
Well, I retired in February, so I'm pretty fresh out of the hopper. Had to decline 04. They actually promoted me, even though I declined it. I was like, hey, you guys got to take this money back because I'm not taking it. You can't get me. But it was a combination of a lot of things, right? I had done some really good growth in my life, started reading 60 books a year, really learned about a skill like podcasting and found the right kind of business community. And once those 3 things were in place, I didn't find any reason for me to stay in the military any longer. There wasn't good options for me and my family. The pay wasn't that much better. It didn't seem like the juice was worth the squeeze anymore. I had gotten what I needed. I'd accomplished all my goals and really was looking forward to building something new, something that wasn't limiting and didn't require me to go be in a specific place at a specific time.
Yeah, I think that's a huge benefit of being out of the uniform. You can still have value, and that's what I try and tell people that are getting close to the end. It's like you can still have value to the organization or to the community, but you don't have to wear the uniform anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to wrap their head around, because for years it's like, hey, I'm going to do 20, or I'm going to do, I used to say, hey, I'm going to do 30 minutes past 20. I'm walking across the stage, and I ended up doing 23 years, Yeah. And all of that is predicated off of, just sometimes it's the people you're around with. Sometimes it's opportunity that's available to you, but transitioning from the military is no easy task. But, sounds like you kind of had a plan in place and it picked up steam. And so you decided to depart. And, I try and ask the Frontline 5, but I don't specifically run down all 5 questions because we just kind of organically answer them. So what are you doing now? And you've already talked about it. You've alluded to, all your podcast work, but, you're pretty significant presence on the interwebs as far as podcasting is concerned. So could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of shows that we host, the Nonprofit Architect Podcast, which I'm considering transitioning to another type of show. Not that I don't like nonprofits or things of that nature. I really am just feeling pulled in a few different directions. But I also host the Titan Evolution podcast with a co-host, Carol Carpenter. She's a badass that owns her own motorcycle race team up in the Pacific Northwest, and that's not launched just yet. We've got, like 15 recorded already, ready to go with that, just working on a few of the last little details before we launch. But the majority of what I do is I help podcasters do it, and I help them do it better. We have coaching services that we run, strategy, we've got courses, we've got materials, and we actually have our own back-end production team that'll do all the great stuff that you can see on any of my shows. We can do that for your show. We can do the back-end production. We can create audiograms, the social media materials that'll help you really do well. We'll create the blog for you from the full transcript. All the things that you need to do as a podcaster, but you run out of time or your skill level isn't there. I know for me, I never did my own editing because I know where my skills lie, and they are not clicking away at the back end of the computer.
Yeah, and I think that's important because I know for me, it's like when I hear people that are like, oh, yeah, I have like 15 or 16 episodes in the can, I look at them and go, man, like, where do you have the time? Because for me, the hardest part about doing this podcast is just being consistent with it. And it's not because it's not something that I'm passionate about. It's because I'm producing on 3 or 4 other shows. So like that back end stuff is very, very time consuming. And most people don't realize that when you start your podcast, the first part isn't just like, oh, I got to find a good microphone and a camera and a podcast server, right? Like that's the easy part because there's so many of them. You can pick and choose what's going to work and what's not. It's the editing. It's, hey, do I need to have an AI translator on the back end of this? Do I want somebody? Because even those AI translators, although they use real language, they still screw up some words every now and then. So if you want to have accuracy in what you're posting, then you have to kind of comb through that and make those additions and make those changes that need to happen. And like you were saying, it's about having a presence because most people don't understand, like, there are some great podcasts out there, tons of great shows. The Veteran Trash Talk guys, and you see how much content those guys have. They're constantly cranking out something. There's a football report, there's betting lines on UFC, whatever you think about, they're out there. And that's every other podcaster wants to do something of that magnitude. And you go through Spotify or you go through, Apple iTunes platform, and what do you find? You find tons and tons and tons. There's probably for every podcast that has 10 episodes, there's probably one that has 1,000. We're all reaching for that brass ring of the Joe Rogans or the Jocko Willnicks where, people are asking you to come on their show, which is the perfect storm. But, as a small podcaster operating out of your office or out of your house, that's one of the things that, it's time consuming. And if you have and some of us don't have the opportunity to do that full time, which is another difficulty that some people have. But, what was your hardest part about coming out of the military and then starting the new gig? Because it sounds like, you had a plan again, as we mentioned before, but, starting something new after 20 years in the uniform is still going to be difficult regardless. So what are your thoughts on that aspect of it?
Transition has a lot of different attitudes, a lot of different levels. It's one thing to take off the uniform, right? Some people are like, I can't wait to take this thing off. My last uniform was a flight suit, and with a flight suit and being a lieutenant, being an LT, like there's some little perks that you gain along the way, and those are roughly gone. There's not people walking around calling me LT anymore. I suppose I could pay my wife to do it. Hey, LT, like, yeah, baby. Like, but that's not really, for business. That's more for the bedroom. But some things you have to look at and consider when transitioning. I knew a few things. I knew that I didn't want to work a regular job. I knew that well in advance. And one of the ways that we set up for that is we worked our tails off the last 15 years. I spent the first 5 getting in debt. Spend the next 15 getting out of debt, making sure everything was paid off, that we had a little nest egg built up. We had $50,000 set aside to allow for exploration, to allow for a side business, to allow for whatever was going to come our way, whether that was going to be vacations, reconnecting with the family. We didn't want to create a scenario where I had to and was forced to jump into another job just to pay the bills. So we paid off all of our debt. We did some remodel stuff on the house. We did a new air conditioner furnace unit 2 years ago, which, man, it is paying off right now. We're in Oklahoma. We've had like 2 months of 100-degree days, but our AC bill is like $120 a month, where I got friends paying $700. Little things like that. Doing the things you need to do. Really, it's about designing what kind of life that you want to have. And if you don't put any thought into it, you're going to get whatever comes your way. What skills do you need? Do you need a degree? What does your network need to look like in order to make this stuff happen? And what does that really look like? And fortunately for me, I started building this stuff while I was still active duty, while I had that active duty paycheck to back up some of the learning process of the bumps and bruises of how to start a podcast and what does that look like. So for me, I had the cash on hand. I started this when I was in the Middle East. So I was getting some of that extra overseas tax-free money to help, soften the blow of some of this stuff. But I know there's so many podcasters out there that are trying to make it, that are trying to figure out these little things and, just trying to make sure that they have the tools they need to get over some of those bumps without taking too big of a hit in the pocketbook.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And one of the things, and I am by no means an expert, but over the last 2 years of doing this, I've learned from Hard Knocks, like one, you got to have good editing software. There's a lot of great free stuff out there. YouTube is your friend, right? You can find that stuff. If you're in a pinch and you can't, afford to hire a professional service, do the research yourself and kind of build it out. So like one of the podcasts that I work on is called Ask for Football. Drop the link in the description. And one of the things that we do is we cover college football for Army as well as, collegiate football programs. And so one of the things that we have to do is we're constantly in the churn. And because it's a current events type of thing, again, a little bit more time and preparation is required. So if we're talking about, the football game on Saturday, then you might want to watch last year's game. You might want to take some notes and you might want to have a script. And these are all things that seem counterintuitive. But if you want to be a good podcaster, a little bit of research, like if you spent 30 minutes a week prepping your podcast, it's going to reap you huge dividends when you get to the back end. And I don't think a lot of people prepare that. And I think this is really where we're going to dive into, get a little bit deeper into the discussion, because you are a pro at this. And that's kind of your passion, is to help podcasters be successful. But one of the other things is, and you mentioned it earlier, is about your network. If you haven't read the Proximity Principle by Ken Coleman, it's a great book. I talk about it all the time. And the reason why I mention it is because there's a phrase in there that absolutely makes 1,000% sense. Your network is your net worth. So if you are trying to get over the hump, you have to surround yourself with people that can either get you a job, help facilitate the job that you're in, or make a very strong recommendation. And heck, that's how you and I ended up, connecting, because someone connected with me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, you need to talk to Travis because you do podcasts and he's a podcaster," and it's crazy how random that stuff seems sometimes, but at the end of the day, it works out. And it's great to have you on. So let's talk about the ultimate podcast checklists and all the other content that you're producing associated with that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We're taking the ultimate podcast guide and we're segmenting it out into a couple of areas, and we're making them really robust and really deep. The Ultimate Podcast Guide in its first one, I think it's like in version 6 right now, right? You take whatever crap you've got, you put it together in a guide, you put it on eJunkie, host it for $4 a month, it automatically delivers to your email. The first guide was good. It was good enough to sell, but every iteration of the guide has just got that much better, that much deeper. I have more experience. I talk to people that give me more experience and better details. And then of all the things that we put together and all the things that we research, especially with upcoming trends, tactics, new software that's available, we take it and we walk you through step by step on how to do this stuff. And it's not just how to do it, but why to make the decision, right? When you look to start a podcast, there's all these decisions. You've got never ending lists of equipment to look through. You've got, 24 different hosting sites you could probably go with. How am I going to get it on Apple? Like, how am I going to do it? We walk you through all these little steps to show you exactly what it takes to do it and what the professionals do. We took a guy, a fellow veteran last year, Richard Kaufman. He hosts a Vertical Momentum podcast. You know Richard, Rob?
No, I don't.
Richard's a great guy. He does a lot. He really upped his podcasting game last year. I was a guest on his show when I was doing something called Warriors Wallet a couple of years ago, helping people with their